the Great. So now everybody knows we're being recorded. Welcome everybody to the UK SMA Newborn Screening Alliance webinar on spinal muscular atrophy in the UK. We have got quite a lot to run through with you today. So I will start by saying hello and just running through a couple of housekeeping things. So firstly, I'm Alice Faber, I'm project manager for the Alliance, and I'll be chairing the discussion today. We are going to have a Q&A session at the end, so any questions that you have as we run through the presentation, please do enter them into the meeting chat. And we'll come back to them in a Q&A session at the end. Anything that we don't get onto during the course of today, we can come back to over email after the event as well. So please don't hold back, just ask any questions that you have, however silly they may seem, and we'll do our best to answer those. Firstly, I want to tell you a little bit about the Alliance. So in case you don't know about the Alliance, we are a coalition of clinicians, academics, patient organisations and representatives with a lot of expertise in that group on spinal muscular atrophy, the condition, the service, living with SMA, supporting families with SMA, and all of these experts have come together with a shared mission around achieving the earliest possible introduction of newborn screening for SMA in the UK. So we know that that will deliver the best outcomes from treatment and reduce future healthcare costs as well. We were really pleased to see that the UK NSC has recommended that an economic model be developed in parallel with planning for an in-service evaluation. We think it's great that you've taken that flexible approach to try and compress the timeline and get to an answer sooner. We are here to try and expedite that part of the process as well, just because we've seen firsthand the huge difference that treating pre-symptomatically can have on patients and their families. So hopefully today will be helpful for you all. We're going to provide an overview of SMA in the UK from a range of different perspectives. And we've got all of these experts on the call as well. So it's hopefully a great opportunity for you to ask any questions that you have already or that are spurred from the discussion today. So the way we're going to run things today, we're going to start off with a family perspective, which I'll introduce you to Portia to deliver in a second. Then we're going to have an overview of SMA and the SMA service in the UK. Laurent is going to give an update, or an introduction really, to the Thames Valley pilot, because we're aware some of you may not be familiar with how that's been set up and how it's progressing. And then we'll finish with some information on what's out there at the moment for families and come on to Q&A. So hopefully that sounds good to everybody. And without further ado, I will hand over to Portia. Portia, if you don't mind turning your mic off and introducing yourself and then telling us your story.
Absolutely. Hello, everybody. It's a real privilege to be here. My name is Portia Thompson. I'm advocacy lead at SMA UK. So I work really closely with the whole SMA community to find out what the issues are and to sort of take those issues to the people that can make a difference, like yourselves, or to create information to help the community out, working with the information team. But today I'm here to talk about my family and my more personal life. So this is my family right here. I am the mother of 4 children. I've got 2 older ones, and we had a big gap, and we had 2 more. Now, little did we know, me and my husband, for every child we had, there was a 1 in 4 chance that that child would have SMA. So my first 3 girls were very lucky, and then Ezra came along, and he is our 1 in 4. Next slide, please, Alice. So we had no idea. We have no family history of SMA. We were really, really excited to be pregnant with our first little boy. And it was a normal pregnancy. It was we had a normal water birth. When he was born and I took him home, I did notice little things. I thought his neck looked a bit strange. When I fed him, milk came out of his nose. But as a new mum, you just, you get on with things. But then at 5 weeks old, Ezra got a cold, just a normal sniffle, and ended up in our local hospital needing support with his breathing. He didn't get better, and after 2 weeks, they decided that they would have to transfer him to PICU up in London, which is 2 hours away from us. So he was intubated, had to be tube fed. They tried to extubate him after 2 weeks. He failed extubation, re-intubated. We had our first Christmas with him in a PICU. It was a very stressful time. When he finally was extubated and was on the mend, one of the nurses actually by his bedside at the specialist hospital mentioned to the doctors that they thought his tone was low, that he wasn't moving as much as he did. But at that time, because he was bright, alert, feeding okay, the doctors put that down to the fact that he'd been angel winged. So they strap babies like this so they can't pull the tube out their nose. And they let us go home. When we got home, things really progressed further. We noticed he'd lost his grasp. He had virtually no movement in his leg, and raised a dummy to his mouth. I saw 3 different health visitors. He even passed his 9-week check, all because they put it down to him being so poorly at 5 weeks old and thought he needed time to recover. I was like, why would that affect his legs? I tried to take him swimming and there was nothing. Finally, I went into the health visitor. I cried my eyes out. He was breathing with his tummy. It just was all seemed not right. And we got a referral and we finally got a diagnosis at 4 months old. And that was sort of the beginning of our new normal, if you like. Have the next slide, please. So soon after diagnosis, we had to talk about treatment. Now, this was 6 years ago. My son is 6 now, and there was no treatment on the NHS. So Ezra's doctors worked really quickly to get access to Spinraza. The only way we could do that was on the expanded access program at that time. So we were really fortunate to be able to get Spinraza. Now, sadly, soon after the diagnosis, Ezra got another cold and we were back in PICU. And that's where he got his first dose of Spinraza at about 5 months old. 5 months old was too late for Ezra, because by then he was reliant on BiPAP overnight. He'd lost his swallow. We had to be trained in BiPAP, a cough assist machine, suctioning, because he can't deal with his secretions. He had to have a peg fitted so his feed could go straight into his tummy. And I had to give up my teaching career to look after him, which had huge implications on the whole family, including our financial situation. We had to accept nurses into our home. We had 12-hour waking nurses overnight. It was such an enormous transformational change to our family. And we had 9 more PICU admissions in his first 3 years. Next slide, please. But you learn to adapt, and our home is now full of adaptive equipment. He drives a power chair. We have standing frames. We have an adaptive bed. We had to move him downstairs. But we tried to have as much fun and as much excitement in between these periods of illness that we can, because every time he gets a cold, there's a chance that he could need to go and have intensive care treatment. He goes to mainstream school. Ezra is a bright young man. He is a chatty young man. He struggles to talk because his facial muscles are very weak. He has a huge vocabulary. And once you tune into him, it's quite easy to know what he's saying. And we try to allow him to experience everything we can. In this picture here at the end, we're on a little ride at a theme park. And we do baking. He does book day at school.
I don't know if it's just me. We seem to have lost Portia.
I think she's frozen, Alison.
She's frozen. Well, let's see if she comes back. And I think I can probably continue the story until she comes back, because I've met Ezra as well. And as Portia was saying, they do give him the best possible life, but I've seen the impact that SMA has had on the family as well. And the key thing is the difference that newborn screening could make. And Portia and SMA UK recently held a party in the park for families with SMA. And I think the key takeaway from that picnic which everyone had a great time and really enjoyed it. But there was such a range of different experiences of SMA opening up because of the different times at which people are being diagnosed. So siblings, like the two in this picture here, if they've got an elder sibling with SMA, they're eligible for screening now. And the younger child in this picture had her SMA picked up and was treated pre-symptomatically. And, you know, that means that her childhood is progressing like a normal child. It's truly outstanding. But there are other children. I think just a few weeks ago, there were 2 babies diagnosed at around 8 months, and that's too late because they've already got symptoms, and those symptoms are irreversible. So we're really keen to see newborn screening. We know that it would make a huge difference. It will make sure that children with SMA get the absolute best possible outcomes from the treatments that are available on the NHS, and it will also deliver best value for money for the NHS as well. Portia, I kind of picked up and tried to do an okay job of telling a story you would have told much better, but I can see you're back in the room now. I just mentioned the picnic in the park. Was there anything else that you wanted to say to kind of close off?
I think
that's
my
okay.
job's out there. What a joy. Yes, I was just going to say exactly that about the inequity that we now see. Did you talk about Maisie and Amelia here?
I did.
Okay, yeah. Perfect. Yeah, and I'll just add, it's really difficult to go to an event like that and knowing that all those children there have the same form as the condition as my son, yet some of them are climbing, walking, eating, playing, talking without any issues, getting through colds. You know, it's really difficult to watch that inequity happen.
Great, thank you, Portia. And yeah, sorry to everyone listening. Portia would have done a much better job of telling that story than I did. So now we will move on to talk about the SMA service. So I'm going to hand over to Elizabeth and Catherine. I'll let you introduce yourselves, and then we'll wait to hear what you've got to say.
Thank you very much, Alice. So I'm Elizabeth Ray. I'm a paediatric neuromuscular specialist, so I provide healthcare for children with SMA, and I've been seeing children and families with SMA for over 20 years now. I work in London and I collaborate with colleagues across the UK in the provision of care for children and families with SMA. And I work in, well, I'll come on to talk about some of the treatments that are available, or the treatments that are available. And I work in a centre where we can deliver all of those available treatments, so I have experience directly with them. Did you want Catherine to introduce herself now as well, Alice?
Great, Catherine, if you don't mind.
Hi, my name's Catherine McWilliam. I'm a clinical geneticist based in Dundee in NHS Tayside. I have an interest in neuromuscular disease, and I'm the current lead for the Scottish Muscle Network. So I'm sort of trying to represent my colleagues across the neuromuscular services within Scotland here today. And I'm pleased to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Alice. So I'll start by saying a little bit about what spinal muscular atrophy, or SMA, is. It's a rare genetic condition. It gives rise to muscle weakness. It leads to progressive muscle weakness, and ultimately that includes the muscles that we need for breathing and feeding. And the most severely affected infants, those with the most severe form of SMA, which we call type 1 SMA, are not expected to survive beyond the age of 2 years without active treatment. And it's estimated that about 1 in 2,000 newborns will be affected by SMA. Currently in the UK, we don't have any newborn screening routinely undertaken to detect SMA. And that means that infants and children affected by SMA are diagnosed when they already have muscle weakness. And you heard from Portia's story, very often they'll already have weakness of the breathing muscles and also the feeding muscles at that stage. And sadly, much of that is irreversible, even with the treatments that we have. And these infants and children are reliant on healthcare professionals who are non-specialists to recognise the significance of the symptoms that parents are describing. And I think it's really important to reflect on the fact that many GPs will never be involved in the care of someone with SMA. It is a rare condition. And again, Portia has explained her difficulties in those early days before a diagnosis was made with a health visitor, I guess, not recognising the significance of those symptoms and that might mean that Ezra had SMA. When the diagnosis is suspected, they'll be referred to a specialist, a neuromuscular specialist, and the diagnosis and treatment would be considered to be extremely urgent medical problems. Alice, thank you. And in terms of the care that's provided for children with SMA, how things are set up across the UK, the model has been established and evolved here over a number of decades, and there's a formal network, clinical network of clinicians. It's called SMA Reach, and the clinicians who are involved in that are really committed to providing accessible and equitable service, making sure that affected infants and children can access appropriate treatments in a timely fashion. And they're committed to delivering care according to internationally published standards of care. And that includes not only access to disease-modifying treatments, which I'll say a little bit about in a minute, but also making sure that there is access to those other important parts of treatment, which include, where it's necessary, management of any breathing problems and feeding problems, nutritional concerns. And the clinicians contribute to a national database, which is another really fundamental part of this network, and means that we have a mechanism already for collating data, which is something that's proven to be very helpful in terms of to improve care and ensuring that there's some standardized approach to care. Alice, could you put to the next slide, please? Thanks. So since the last newborn screening assessment looking at SMA, there have been 3 disease-modifying treatments that have been approved for use across the NHS. These are all genetic-modifying treatments. The first 2 listed there, nusinersen and risdiplam, are available through a managed access agreement. And they are both genetic modifying treatments. The third treatment is a direct gene replacement. So it's replacing the faulty gene that gives rise to SMA. And that treatment, Zolgensma or onasemnogene abiparvovec, is routinely commissioned by NHS. And all 3 treatments are available both for those who are already affected by the SMA, so they already have muscle weakness, and those who don't actually have any weakness at all, who are pre-symptomatic. Of course, currently in the UK, we are nearly always treating those who've already got muscle weakness because we don't have a newborn screening programme here. And those who are picked up through newborn screening, it's usually because there's an affected sibling. All 3 of those treatments, it's all right, Alice, you don't need to flip back. I was just going to say that all 3 of those treatments have been shown to have really excellent outcomes, compatible with normal motor development, not developing any weakness if the treatment is started before the baby has developed any muscle weakness, so pre-symptomatic. they do also have variable outcomes for those who already have muscle weakness. In terms of the actual setup of services across the UK, in England, there are 15 specialist paediatric neuromuscular centres, part of SMA Reach, and those 15 centres will all provide access to what we call the standard of care for a child with SMA, and they will deliver treatment with risdiplam or nusinersen. For those who are going to be considered for the Zolgensma gene therapy, there are 4 services across England in Manchester, Bristol, London and Sheffield, which are commissioned to deliver that treatment. And Catherine, I don't know if you want to say a little bit about Scotland.
Sure, happy to come in just now. So in Scotland, we work in a very similar way to the rest of the UK, although on a smaller scale because of our population size. There are 4 specialist centres who provide an SMA service across Scotland. These are based in Aberdeen, Dundee, where I am, and in Edinburgh and in Glasgow, with Glasgow being our gene therapy infusion centre. The clinicians that are based across Scotland in these specialist centres are in regular contact as and when they need to be, as patients arise or issues arise. And there's also additional support if needed from the national MDT, which is based in NHS England, which I'm sure Elizabeth will talk a little bit more about. I'll hand back to you.
Thank you, Catherine. And in Wales, children who are affected by SMA in Wales currently have access to risdiplam through the University Hospital in Cardiff. But those who are going to receive treatment with nusinersen will be referred to Bristol. And that's related to some of the difficulties in terms of the delivery of the treatment. That's the pathway that is being worked on. And those who require the Zolgensma gene therapy will be referred into England. And for Northern Ireland, there's a centre in Belfast that has the capacity to deliver all 3 of the medical treatments. But as with Wales, we'll tap into the national MDT, multidisciplinary team for the gene therapy provision that's set up in England. And just to say that in terms of the provision of care, and I think the same would apply to Scotland as well, that these neuromuscular centres are not providing care in isolation from the community services, but operate by a shared care arrangement with local paediatric services and GPs. I can see Catherine nodding. Alice, could you? Thank you. So I've mentioned briefly a national multidisciplinary team that has been established, and this is a team that meets fortnightly and was set up at the time that the Zolgensma gene therapy was commissioned for use across the NHS. And the purpose of the MDT is to discuss those infants who receive gene therapy or who are referred to be considered for gene therapy, and to have some process to try and ensure that there's equity, and that if there are any issues with demand capacity mismatch in different areas of the country, that can be managed actively, and that it may be that one centre has capacity and another doesn't, and a child has to travel a little further to receive treatment. But there is a process that's in place to try and manage that equity. And Catherine's mentioned that if necessary, you would have links in with that MDT, Catherine. Thank you, Alice. And in terms of the actual pathway of care that's in place currently across the NHS England, then if a child is suspected of having SMA by their healthcare professional, and usually that would be GP or health visitor, they'll be referred to a specialist service, and that referral would be treated as a really urgent referral. And there would be a clinical assessment. And if it was felt that SMA is the likely diagnosis, that needs to be confirmed as a diagnosis. And that requires a blood test to be taken for specific genetic testing. to confirm the diagnosis. And the current turnaround time specified in the NHS England directory for urgent genetic testing is currently up to 14 days. The reality is that the laboratories, in consultation with the clinicians who are recognising the importance of starting treatment as a matter of urgency, will usually deliver the genetic results much faster than 14 days and usually within 5 days. But the clinicians across SMA Reach are in agreement that this really needs to be brought down further to 2 to 3 days so that we can make the genetic diagnosis as rapidly as possible and enable appropriate treatment. Once a diagnosis is confirmed, that would lead on to discussing the results with the family and agreeing what the appropriate treatment is. And you'll see on the right-hand side of this screen a sort of treatment decision-making pathway. And so again, not to labour the point, but the vast majority of infants and children in this country diagnosed with SMA are already weak at the point of being diagnosed. So they have symptoms. And for some of them, palliative care might actually be the preferred management option after discussion with families, but the majority will receive one of the disease-modifying treatments, nusinersen, risdiplam or Zolgensma, and they would receive that as soon as possible. For the small number who are diagnosed before they have any muscle weakness at all, the presymptomatic group, there is a factor that's just important in terms of considering treatment. So it would be a matter of urgency to commence treatment before they develop any muscle weakness, because we want to give those infants the best opportunities in life to prevent them developing muscle weakness. There is a gene called the SMN2 gene, which we have variable numbers of copies of. And this is a gene that's really important in terms of modifying how severe the SMA is in an individual. And the more copies of SMN2 gene you have, the less severely you are likely to be affected by the SMA. So you will see on that treatment decision pathway that those with 2 to 3 copies of the SMN2 gene would be offered treatment as a matter of urgency, aiming to start it within days of having the diagnosis. And this would be one of the 3 treatments I've mentioned. Those with 4 copies of the SMN2 gene can receive treatment with nusinersen, and currently, if they're over 2 months old, risdiplam in this country. There is the option with those with the 4 copies to also adopt a watch and wait process. This is something that would obviously be in discussion with the family, and to only treat at the onset of any symptoms. I think, Alice, at that point, I'll probably stop talking.
Yeah, that was brilliant, very helpful. Thank you very much, Elizabeth. I can't see the meeting chat, but I'm hoping that people are putting their questions into the chat. So thank you very much, Elizabeth and Catherine. We're now going to move on to Laurent Servet, who is chair of the Alliance, but also is running the Thames Valley pilot. So Laurent, I will hand over to you. You could say a few more words of introduction and then tell us more about the pilot that you're leading. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. As you can guess from my accent, I'm not from the UK. I'm born and bred in Belgium. And I've had the chance to start treating presymptomatic patients since 2017. So for the last 6 years, because at that time we had the first siblings. And we initiated in Belgium our newborn screening program in 2018. So for the last 5 years in Belgium, we see only patients identified after newborn screening and not patients identified per symptoms. I've been also lucky because I was investigator in the different presymptomatic trials. So I could see over the last 5 years a very large number of patients identified after newborn screening and treated just at birth. And then I came in the UK 4 years ago, and I'm still working in Belgium a little bit. And then I saw again these patients identified after symptoms. I saw again these patients identified after symptoms, treated after symptoms, and presenting a very significant disability, including very few of them are actually ambulant. Many of them are supported by ventilation or nasogastric tube. And in sharp contrast, patients identified by newborn screening and treated at birth are for most of them doing perfectly well. We recently reviewed all the patients published in the different programs, and we found out that patients patients with 3 copies are all but one ambulant at the age of 18 months, all but one. These patients were all wheelchair bound otherwise. And we also found out that patients with 2 copies and no symptoms at birth, nearly all of them acquire ambulation by the end of the follow-up period. So it's a eyes-popping difference between the 2 populations. This has been demonstrated in a large number of clinical trials, in a large number of natural history studies. So when I came in the UK back to 2019, I mean, this was one of my priority to set this up and to set up a pilot and to work with the community to avoid to see every 5 days a new patient showing up with symptoms of SMA, knowing that we could have been transformative for these patients and this family if we had newborn screening. So we initiated a pilot that was funded by several sources, including Oxford Biomedical Research Center, but also Novartis Gene Therapy and Roche, Hoffmann La Roche. And we could initiate this program in December 2021. This was, as you might imagine, a difficult period of time because of, I don't know if you've heard about it, COVID-19 is a viral infection pandemic at that period of time. So the idea was not so much to detect a large number of patients because we had a limited population, which is the Thames Valley, but much more to investigate how this is actually feasible in the UK, what is the buy-in from the population. So so we initiated this pilot and in 5 different centers in 5 different trusts of James Valley. May I have the next slide, please? And with several objectives, yes. First, to assess the uptake of newborn blood spot genetic screening, to determine the feasibility, the reliability of the process. A very important thing, by the way, when we consider the uptake is that it's not so much the uptake of the newborn screening, it's the uptake of a research, because this is registered as a research. This has ethical approval. People have to sign a consent. So it's not so much the buy-in of a newborn screening test, it's the buy-in of taking part in a research on a newborn screening test, which makes things slightly different. So you have here the list of the objectives. Next slide. So 4 trusts across the Thames Valley, and 6 specific sites. So you have the list here. So the consent is mostly prenatal. Next slide. So today we have screened over 10,000 babies. We had no false positive. We have not yet identified a patient, which is entirely normal from a statistical perspective, with an incidence of 1 out of 10,000. You probably know the statistical law of Poisson, which will tell you that you have maybe 60% of chance to evaluate, to find a patient if you test 10,000 patients in a disease for which the incidence is 1 out of 10,000. And we are currently extending to other regions that are willing to participate into this pilot. May I have next slide? So yeah, that's where we are today. There is some qualitative and quantified data is that there is a very significant buy-in and an enthusiasm of a lot of young mothers. And a question that is coming again and again is, why is it? I mean, why is it still a research? Why isn't it, more generalized? And why is it only coming now? So the pilot is doing well so far. We have not been informed of any false negative. Of course, for false negative, you probably know that as these patients may show up at the age of 3-4 years, it's difficult to guarantee that we have no false negative, but all quality controls were properly identified. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Laurent. That was really helpful. Please put your questions for Laurent in the chat and we'll come back to those later. So now for our last presentation, I'm going to hand you over to Liz Ryburn. Liz, if you could introduce yourself and then we can run through your slides. Thank you.
Many thanks, Alice. Good to meet you all, though I can't see you. So I'm Liz Ryburn. I've been with the charity SMA UK since May 2011 as a member of the support services team. SMA UK, if you don't know it, it's a small charity and the only national patient group that focuses exclusively on this condition. We provide information and support, and we advocate for access to treatment and better care and services. And we are, as you know, members of the SMA Newborn Screening Alliance. The charity was founded in 1985 and works closely not only with the SMA patient community, but also with the UK clinical network. One of our key roles is the development and maintenance of our information service. And I'm the lead coordinator for this service, working with my colleague, and together we make up 1.5 FTEs. Now, I have to say we don't actually ever exclusively focus on information, much as we might like to. Next slide, Alice, please. Our service is accredited to the Patient Information Forum, which you may or may not have heard of. This confirms that our SMA-related information has been through a professional and thorough production process and is based on reliable, up-to-date evidence which is communicated clearly. We apply these principles across the board, which allows us to show the PIF tick on our website as a whole. And the PIF tick also appears on any information sheet or guide which has been through the process and where there is a clear audit trail demonstrating in particular that it has been reviewed by appropriate SMA clinical experts and members of the target audience. And all the comments and feedback have been taken into account. And we are audited annually by the Patient Information Forum to make sure that we are actually following those processes. So the audience I mentioned varies. It may be families whose child has been recently diagnosed, members of the public who want to know more about the condition, as well as the wider SMA community looking for more in-depth information about living with SMA. And I think it would be fair to say that SMA UK is a known and trusted information source, with our website ranked highly when people search for SMA, and it is also signposted from the NHS website itself. Next slide, please, Alice. On the 1st of August, we launched our new website along with our new branding. And this page shows you some of the topics we cover in our information sheets and guides that carry the PIF tick. And you can see they include an overview of SMA, the genetics of the condition, and family planning. And as well as the information sheets, each section usually has links to other useful related information. That said, the transfer to a new website has been a huge undertaking, and we're still working on how everything is organised and linked. Next slide, please, Alice. And you can see on this slide examples of some of the information in 2 of the sections. On the left, you can see the information sheet about the symptoms and effects of 5q SMA type 1. This covers the natural history of the condition when a child is not treated. There are also other sheets about the natural history of the other types of 5q SMA. And this is important information for any parent discussing the different possible pathways with their clinical team. On the right, you can see we have a guide about drug treatments for children in England. Now, this covers all 3 treatments, the clinical trial results, possible side effects, and a lot of other information. It suggests questions parents may wish to discuss further with their clinical team as they consider the risks and benefits of each treatment that may be possible for their child. At the moment, this sheet specifies England only because the section on the eligibility criteria, which for nusinersen and risdiplam are currently governed by the 2 MAAs, and these are followed in also followed in Northern Ireland and Wales. So we have to be very specific in the title. But all the other information in this guide is useful for parents wherever they live in the UK. And on the actual page which holds this information sheet, we link to the eligibility criteria for Scotland. So we're hoping when we've been through the managed access agreement, we may have some sort of single unified UK approach to drug treatments for SMA. We are, though, very aware that almost all our information pages will need to be reviewed and updated to reflect the changes that the in-service evaluation will bring to diagnosis and the information that parents will have if they receive a positive screening result. So we imagine, for example, that the title and introduction to the symptoms and effects of type 1 SMA will need to change to capture this. And perhaps it will be symptoms and effects of 5q SMA when a baby has 2 to 3 SMN2 copies. And we'll talk about how the condition is likely to develop without treatment. So we will be working with clinicians like Elizabeth to do this. And Elizabeth is a frequent reviewer for us and a very good one indeed. We'll also be working on PDFs for our information sheets. Now we have our new branding guidelines. And at the moment, they're either only in web page form or, as for this drug information sheet, using old branding. Next slide, please, Alice. It is vitally important that parents considering screening can access accurate, up-to-date information to support them through all the decisions they may face, and that information on our website and other key information sources, such as the NHS website, are all up-to-date and all align. And although we're a very small information team, we are very keen to work with the UK NSC and NHS England to support the development of the information that will be needed for the in-service evaluation, wherever that's going to be held, and to make sure that our information aligns with this. To achieve this, we would greatly appreciate a heads up on the timeline for the evaluation as soon as this is possible, so that we can plan for the work we will need to undertake and be ready to launch our new information sheets and guides at the appropriate time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Liz. Right, that is the end of our presentations. So we will now go into the Q&A session. Hopefully everyone's come up on the screen. I can't see a single question in the chat, so I'm going to encourage people to post their questions. I've got a few questions that I think, oh, here's one that's just popped up. Can you tell us any more about other types of SMA? You mentioned type 1, can all be detected via newborn screening. Who would like to go on that one? Laurent, you can make a start.
Oh. So there are several types of SMA type 0 that starts in utero and is very symptomatic at birth. This SMA type 1 we've been discussing about, SMA type 2, 3, and 4, that starts later on. We used to say that SMA type 2, type 3 are less severe. Well, just to mention that SMA type 3 patients 50% of them will lose ambulation by the age of 12 years, right? And many of them will lose ambulation later on. So we should not call mild a disease in which 50% of patients lose ambulation by the age of 10 years. We call it mild because we benchmark with SMA type 1, in which patients die by the age of 1 year. But it's the same level of severity like Duchenne. I mean, so nobody will call Duchenne a mild disease. So I think that it's important first to mention that this is not mild form. It's maybe milder if you compare with a lethal disease. All these forms have the same genetic, which is a homozygous deletion of exon 7 in SMN1 gene. Only 5% of patients have a point mutation on one allele and a deletion on the other one, and cannot be captured by PCR. But 95% of all SMA patients have the same homozygous deletions and can be equally captured by PCR. So to make very short a long answer, all these forms are equally detectable by current newborn screening.
Thank you, Laura. Anything to add, Elizabeth or Catherine? Anyone else? No. And we've got another question. Are there countries that have a newborn screening program that includes SMA screening? Seeing lots of nods. Who would like to answer this one?
So
Laura,
I can continue. So many countries nowadays. I mean, not only the US, Australia, Japan, but many countries in Europe at the different stage. Some have official program, like Belgium, for instance. It's entirely official. Germany, US. Some it's still pilot, and the very last one has just been published in the Lancet. It's Ukraine. So Ukraine during the war has set up a pilot for newborn screening in the region of Lviv and Kiev. So yeah, today we estimate that more than 99% of kids in the US are screened for SMA, and more than 50% are screened in EU, plus of course additional countries like Australia, Japan, Qatar, Israel, and many others.
Thank you, Laura. I had a question around the conversation that takes place between a clinician and patient's family. So we now have some families where children have been diagnosed pre-symptomatically because they've got a sibling who's got the condition and they've been screened. Just thinking about the development of an in-service evaluation, the fact that that will hopefully become a more common occurrence. Are there major differences in the conversation that takes place, given that there are no kind of outward indications of the condition at that point? And Elizabeth, I'll come to you first, if that's okay.
Yes, that's fine. Thank you, Alice. So I think the major difference in the discussion is around the outcomes to be expected from treatments. So currently, the pre-symptomatic cases we pick up are those who are siblings. So the families already have in-depth knowledge firsthand of SMA. Of course, it is different if you're picking up through a screening program where the majority detected are not going to have any knowledge of SMA. And so it's something that's very new to them. And so that there would have to be the discussion about what the condition is, how it's predicted to affect someone if you don't provide treatment. And Liz has very helpfully talked about the patient information that I think is absolutely crucial, part of that. But I do think that the really fundamental differences do come down to the treatment and the expectations of treatment. For if you provide the treatment to a baby who doesn't have any symptoms at all, the expectation, as Laurent has already said, that they are going to sit, stand, walk, and go on and enjoy a sort of normal childhood development in the majority, contrasted with a symptomatically affected child who's already weak, where you have to have the discussion that we can treat to prevent this getting any worse, but the expectation is wheelchair user, and may need support for breathing through the non-invasive ventilation and so on. I think the other important aspect with the treatment is particularly with the gene therapy. Many of the issues related to the side effects with the gene therapy are more of a problem when they're given to infants who are heavier and older at the time they receive it. So you're not only seeing greater benefits from providing treatment earlier, but you're also potentially seeing lower risks. Those, I think, are the main differences for me.
Thank you very much. Laurent, did you have anything to add on that question?
Yeah, I think that the communication with parents is obviously, as Elizabeth says, very different, especially when it comes to parents who have no experience, no knowledge about SMA, which is very different of a family who has been living with SMA for years sometimes. So my personal experience in Belgium is that it induces a complete different therapeutic relationship with the patients, because you're not the good doctors receiving the patients to give a treatment. You're the bad guy calling and seeing the patients and bringing in bad news, right? So we have specifically developed a training with the key opinion leaders from US and Europe who have been exposed several times to this difficult management of patients. And we have today trained about 50 healthcare providers in Liège during 2 sessions with role plays on how to deliver this type of diagnosis, how to manage these patients. I think that an important point is to mention, because we speak about presymptomatic patients, and I agree that many of these patients are presymptomatic, but we have also many patients identified by newborn screening with 2 copies of SMA2. When you closely look at them, and at the very first day, they have already some minor symptoms. Obviously, these are very minor. Sometimes it's something that nobody will spot, but when you know it and you start looking at it and you look at it with your eyes of a physician who has seen some patients with SMA, then you spot clearly the symptoms. We know that the patients who have already symptoms and 2 copies of SMA2 have not such a good prognosis of patients with 3 copies, but nevertheless, the prognosis is much, much, much better than if we had waited, because these patients have a very rapid form of SMA. If at the age of 2 weeks, you can already spot some symptoms. So I think that what is important is not only, of course, the communication from a psychological perspective, but also to raise reasonable expectation. Because if we just say to these families with patients with 2 copies of SMA2 and already symptoms, we say, well, don't worry, it's identified by a newborn screening, it's going to be all right. Well, yes, it's going to be all right, but it's not going to be normal, right? And we need to make it clear, and we need to raise reasonable expectation. I think that it's a key point in SMA, but in many other diseases for which we have these new treatments, is to raise a reasonable data-based expectation.
That's really helpful. Thank you. There's a related question in the chat from Carolina. Can you talk a bit more about how treatment options are discussed with families and what is the guidance on options? I don't know if it's easy to generalize on that, but Elizabeth, perhaps we could come back to you to make a start on that one.
Thank you very much. So, Alice, just to be clear, talking about how we go through the different treatment options.
Yeah, that's what I'd understood from the
with SMA. Yeah. Thank you. It's not entirely straightforward, because I think it's something that there are different facets to it that play into it. So each of the treatments has its own potential side effects that you would consider. The treatments are all delivered very differently. So risdiplam is given as a daily oral treatment. The nusinersen is given by regular injection into the back, and intrathecal injection into the cerebrospinal fluid, and the Zolgensma is given as a single intravenous infusion straight into the blood. So different means of giving them different side effects. we add to that currently within NHS, the managed access agreements for nusinersen and risdiplam, through which we can give the treatments, have fairly strict eligibility criteria. So there might be something about the individual child that means that they can't receive one of those treatments. And when it comes to Zolgensma, there are also certain clinical aspects that you have to consider, the factors that might mean it's not appropriate for one child. So I think probably the best example there is that the vector for the gene therapy is called AAV9. It's derived from a virus, and you can have antibodies to that virus. And if you do have antibodies to that, you wouldn't expect the Zolgensma to work. So we would screen the blood for those antibodies. And if a baby has those antibodies, Zolgensma is not a treatment option. So you can see that there are factors that we have to consider, some of which are very, I suppose, clear factors that would say you can't receive that treatment and therefore you've got to look at this. Other times, it may be that all three of those treatments would be an option for an individual child, in which case it really does come down to talking about what the method of giving the treatment is, what that means for the child. And just to say, we don't have any comparative trials for the three treatments. So you can't say that there's a clinical trial that's shown this one works better than that one in this particular group of people affected by SMA. But what we do know is that all three treatments work best when they're given at the earliest possible stage. And so I think all clinicians would agree that the real priority is start a treatment quickly. And that means that if one treatment is going to be difficult to give, or there's a potential concern about particular side effect in a child with that, you might say, well, we're not going to do that, but we are going to do this one. I don't know if that helps in answering that at all.
I think that's really helpful. I wondered whether it might also be helpful, Portia, to hear a bit about how, what are families' perspectives on treatments? Because you've obviously been involved with the SMA community since there weren't really treatments available for everyone. And now there's a very different situation, and the hope that there will be newborn screening in the future as well. And I just wondered if you could say a little bit more about the family perspective.
Absolutely. Yes. So my son has Spinraza, which is an invasive procedure. So we have to go into hospital. It's delivered into his spinal fluid whilst he's awake. It's just a bit of Emla cream to numb the area. And that can be very difficult for some children. I'm very fortunate that my son now understands why he's getting it. He's very brave and he goes into it. I think that Zolgensma is a one-off treatment. And so for the very, very young babies, it's much safer for them. It was an option for my son at one point, but as we look at the clinical evidence and the side effects are much more severe in heavier children, so we decided not to go for that. Spinraza is working really well for him. So we're happy where we are. And I think the most important thing for families is that they have choice, that they can look at all three, they can look at the side effects, as Elizabeth was saying, they can look at the different methods, and they can think what would be best for our lifestyle, for our child, at this moment in time. And I think as long as we have that choice, that's the most important thing.
That's great, thank you. I can see we don't have any more. Oh, here's another question, just as I was about to start wrapping things up. Laurent, you mentioned that the Oxford study has had no false positives. Can you tell us why you think this is the case and how the Oxford study set the cutoff for the NBS lab?
So actually, we can be proud of that, but not so much, because in many programs there is no false positive. The fact is that there are two ways of doing. The first one is to make a PCR, polymerase chain reaction, which is the first test, and then if it's positive, to call the family and to meet them. That's what is done in several states in the US. The beauty is that it goes fast, but the ugly side is that, one, you don't have the number of copies of SMN2, so you do not communicate when you communicate first with the family, you don't know how many copies the patient has, which makes your life as a physician a little bit more difficult, because as you might imagine, you don't speak the same way if the patient has 4 copies or 2 copies, and you may have false positive. So the alternative, which is what we're doing in Belgium and that we're doing in Oxford, is if you have a positive case on PCR to check on MLPA. And the beauty of checking on MLPA is that, one, you have the number of copies of SMN2 when you meet the family. And I can tell you as a physician who has to discuss with the family, this makes a big difference. And B, you have no false positive because you have a second test, which is another method, let's say. So we had no false positive in Belgium. In all countries who have this 2-tier process, PCR, then MLPA, you have no false positive. False positive are only when you have a single PCR. Of course, the 5% of patients who have a point mutation and an allele and a deletion on the other allele will not be captured by any method, right? So these are false negative. I will not call them false negative because actually they're not supposed to be identified by the method. We know it since day one. So that's type of genotypes that are not identified by the screening. But again, if you go with this 2-tier process that include MLPA, you have no false positive. Then there is an ugly side that you lose a little bit of time, like 1 or 2 days, to run the MLPA on the same blood spot. But the beauty again is that you have no false positive and that you know how to communicate with families. And of course, the sense of emergency if in a patient with 4 copies or 2 copies is completely different. And the way you will discuss with families is completely different.
That's great. Thank you very much, Laurent. Panel, do you have anything else that you think we haven't discussed that's important for people to know? If you do, please speak now. Otherwise, I can see that the questions have dried up in the chat. That doesn't mean everybody who's listening in, you won't have a chance to ask questions. So the Alliance, which goes beyond this panel, and we've got several other members and networks as well that we can tap into. And we're going to kind of corral that expertise to try and help you as you prepare for the in-service evaluation. We're launching a rapid response SMA Q&A service, whereby we're going to help people answer any questions that they have on SMA, the service, the condition, what might need to happen for newborn screening to be rolled out more broadly. And we've got an email address where you can send those questions, which is no longer on my clipboard, but I will send round an email afterwards, and we'll also be putting a page up on the Alliance website next week to officially launch this service. But hopefully that's something you can tap into as you get ready for the in-service evaluation. Liz, I can see your hands popped up.
I just one small point, because I think at the beginning we covered how important it was that this is an equitable service, and you described how the these centres are spread across the country, but sometimes people will have to travel a long way to infusion centres. And SMA UK acknowledges that, and we offer grants to help with travel subsistence for any family assessing treatment who is going to be in financial difficulty. So I think as a community, we really are very keen on equitable access, and we will be continuing to do that. It's a small point, but I just think it's important. We're all behind this.
I think it's really important, and I think hopefully everyone can see that the Alliance is a kind of demonstration of the coordination across the service between the clinicians, the patient organisations, the families, and everybody's working together to try and deliver the best outcomes possible to patients. And we're looking forward to working with all of the people who've joined the call to get an in-service evaluation planned and up and running as soon as possible. So please do use us as a resource, and we'll be in touch with more information on that. Thank you very much to everyone for joining. Thank you to our panelists, and hopefully everyone's found this useful. Thanks very much. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.